This is Salem, Massachusetts, which famously got caught up in a witch craze in 1692 that led to the executions of 19 people. It was a society gone mad, overcome by fear and suspicion. And it's not the last time this happened. In fact, 200 years later, in 1892, you get the story of Mercy Brown. Mercy Brown was the unassuming daughter of George Brown, a Rhode Island farmer whose life had just been through a series of tragedies. Tuberculosis had been ravaging the area, they called it consumption at the time, and in this outbreak, George lost his wife Mary, his daughter Mary Olive Brown, and in the same year, Mercy Brown herself died of the illness. And even as he was burying Mercy, his son Edwin became sick. But if Mercy's life had been unassuming, her death would be nothing of the sort. Because 2 months later, a mob of people from the nearby town of Exeter dug up Mercy's body, pulled out her heart, and set it on fire. Mercy unfortunately got caught up in another Salem witch trial-like event that took place in New England in the late 1800s. Only this time they didn't think that Mercy was a witch. They thought she was a vampire. So just to put this time period into perspective, this was the 1890s. This was the Gilded Age. We had light bulbs and telephones, transatlantic steamships. Mercedes had its first car on the road at this point. We even had the germ theory of medicine, though it was still in its early days and hadn't been universally adopted in some rural areas. The old folk remedies and superstitions held sway. And rural New England was one of those places. By the way, Mercy Brown was not an isolated event. Another story involves Rachel Harris of Manchester, Vermont. This was about 100 years earlier in 1790, but Rachel died of tuberculosis. Her husband then married her stepsister, Hilda, who also started to show signs of TB. And the local townspeople thought that it was Rachel's fault, that she was escaping her grave at night and enacting revenge on her stepsister. So they exhumed Rachel's corpse in February of 1793. They removed her heart, liver, and lungs and burned them on a blacksmith's forge. This was a big event, by the way. Like 500 people showed up to take part in this. Although, I don't know, in fairness, there probably wasn't a whole lot to do in 1793 Vermont. Regardless, despite their valiant efforts, it didn't stop Hulda from dying in September of that year. So this was a real thing. People were convinced that vampires existed and were preying on the living. But these weren't exactly the vampires that we think of today. Today we've seen vampires in any conceivable way possible, from Count Dracula to Edward Cullen from Twilight to Grandpa Munster. But all vampires in fiction have a few core characteristics in common. They drink human blood, they can turn their victims into vampires, they prey on their victims at night because the sun kills them, they have hypnotic powers, and they can't see their images in mirrors and have no shadows. Of course, a lot of what we think of now as a vampire was kind of popularized first by Bram Stoker, who wrote Dracula in 1897. He was the first person to take all of these sort of folk stories about vampires and sort of codify them in a way. It's thought that he named the character Dracula after Vlad III, who ruled an area of modern-day Romania called Wallachia from 1456 to 1462. His father was Vlad II, who went by Vlad Dracul, meaning Vlad the Dragon, so Vlad III was called Dracula. He was also called Vlad the Impaler because he got a kick out of, impaling his enemies on wooden stakes. It was also said that he enjoyed dining amongst his dying victims and would dip his bread in their blood, which is horrifying and really unsanitary. Another historical figure that may have inspired Bram Stoker is a Hungarian countess named Elizabeth Bathory. If you've never heard of Elizabeth Bathory, it's probably because she killed everyone who met her. It's rumored that she tortured and murdered more than 600 young women during the 16th and 17th centuries, and she would even bathe in the victim's blood. Again, guys, pathogens, jeez. It should be noted that these accusations may have been politically motivated and completely untrue, but they did feed into beliefs that people already had about monsters drinking the blood of others. So these stories go all the way back to the Middle Ages as plagues began to spread throughout Europe. People didn't know what was going on. They often turned to folk tales and supernatural stuff to explain it. Like, for example, some of the victims of the plague had mouth lesions that bled, and some thought that their mouths were bloody because they'd been, drinking other people's blood. The point is, there are a few diseases that historians think are related to vampire stories. The first one is rabies. In 1998, neurologist Juan Gomez Alonso published a paper in Neurology that argued that the symptoms of rabies might explain vampire myths. Rabies lyssavirus causes rabies in animals. It's transmitted through direct contact with saliva or brain nervous tissue from an infected animal. And yet, rabies affects the central nervous system. Once it reaches the brain, it can cause things like agitation, anxiety, confusion, hallucinations even, before eventually killing the victim. Have you ever actually looked into rabies? Rabies sucks. And people with rabies go rabid. They bite and scratch and claw at people like a wild animal. Seeing a person do that might put some ideas in your head. The article also mentions that people who die from rabies often die from suffocation or cardiorespiratory arrest. This apparently can make the blood less likely to coagulate and hinder the composition, which might lead some people to think that the dead person is looking more undead than dead. He also pointed out some correlations in rabies outbreaks and the birth of vampire tales in the 1720s in Eastern Europe. In fact, one physician in 1733 got closer than he thought when he described vampires as, quote, a contagious illness more or less the same nature as that which comes from the bite of a rabid dog. But another contender is porphyria. So rabies may explain the biting and scratching parts of vampire lore, but other characteristics could be explained by a blood condition called porphyria. For people with porphyria, their bodies have trouble making heme, which is an essential part of hemoglobin. That's what carries oxygen around in our blood. And there are two broad types of porphyria. There's acute porphyria, which affect the nervous system, and cutaneous porphyrias that affect the skin. The most common type of acute porphyria is acute intermittent porphyria, which causes sudden and painful attacks. These attacks may include seizures, breathing problems, and red or brown urine, which one might expect one's urine to look like if you were drinking a lot of blood. And these attacks are often set off by triggers including stress, medications, and sunlight. Now, similarly, the skin porphyria is also set off by sunlight. It can cause blisters and excessive hair growth. Porphyria cutanea tarda, or PET, is the most common form of cutaneous porphyrias. It's characterized by extreme sensitivity to sunlight. If exposed to sunlight, people with PET might experience, again, skin blisters, excessive hair growth, or red or brown urine. So they're burned by sunlight, they only come out at night, and they have red pee. Like they've guzzled so much blood that they're just peeing red. And to tack on top of that, one of the treatments for porphyria was to drink animal blood. And people have even speculated that repeated porphyria attacks may cause facial disfigurement and gums to recede, kind of leading to the teeth having a fanged look. Oh, and believe it or not, garlic has a high sulfur content, and that can make it a potential trigger for a porphyria attack. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting connections there, and I definitely could see people mistaking that disease for vampirism, but I don't think that that's where it all came from. Yeah, porphyria is a very rare disease, so I find it kind of unlikely that all the vampire myths came from the very few people walking around with that, but I could totally see how somebody back then might have had their belief reinforced by seeing somebody that has porphyria. But the disease that's most associated with vampires is tuberculosis. Yeah, TB is especially associated with the New England vampire beliefs in the 18th and 19th centuries. A bacteria called Mycobacterium tuberculosis causes TB, which destroys lung tissue and can be fatal if not treated properly. People who experience untreated TB lose weight, become weak, have fevers, and can cough up blood. It basically makes a person look like their blood is being slowly drained out of their bodies, like they wake up every morning a little bit paler than the day before, like something is taking it from them in the middle of the night. TB can also be spread from person to person through the air. It's airborne, but most people back then didn't understand how that worked. So it's no wonder that they might have thought that a supernatural creature was sucking the life out of those dying from TB. And usually that creature was somebody who had recently died. While we're at it real quick, there are a few other supernatural myths that we may have a disease to thank for that. Like werewolves may have been inspired by rabies for all the reasons I listed before. There's also a condition called lycanthropy that makes people hallucinate that they're four-legged animals. There's also hypertrichosis, which in some cases causes hair to grow all over a person's body, giving them a sort of a teen wolf flavor. Witches are sometimes associated with ergot poisoning, which is a wheat fungus that can cause manic episodes and hallucinations. But in the case of the vampire craze of the 18th and 19th centuries in New England, it was tuberculosis. It was totally tuberculosis. A disease that so appears to consume the body that they actually called it consumption. It's easy to see why someone might expect that something else is consuming the body. Maybe somebody who just died. Someone like Mercy Brown. As tuberculosis ravaged nearby Exeter, the townspeople began to suspect things, maybe out of desperation. They just started looking for patterns. And while everybody had suffered during this outbreak, maybe none more so than George Brown, who had lost his wife, his 2 daughters, and now his only son was sick. I can only imagine that by the time these townspeople showed up with their shovels, intent on digging up his family, George was just too exhausted to say no. They dug up his wife Mary and his older daughter Mary Olive, but they had deteriorated to the point that they decided that it couldn't possibly be them. But Mercy, who had only been in the ground for 2 months, in the winter no less, looked remarkably fresh. In fact, her hair and nails seemed to have grown a little bit and blood still pooled in her body. So they did the thing that the folk tales said to do. They took out her heart, burned it, and then mixed the ashes into a potion for Edwin to drink. This would hopefully cure him of the vampire curse. It didn't. He died a few months later. The Mercy Brown story did make some headlines, though, and in fact, Clippings of these stories and these articles were found in Bram Stoker's files after he died, so he did know about it. May have even been inspired by it. The vampire panic started to die down in the early 20th century when, medical knowledge improved and tuberculosis became treatable with antibiotics. In fact, Mercy Brown is thought to be the very last confirmed vampire in America. Today, her gravesite is a tourist attraction. Visitors to the grave may leave gifts behind like jewelry and flowers. Or in one case, a note that simply read, "You go, girl." Hey, one little life hack that I can pass on to you if you want to make sure that somebody isn't a vampire, just invite them over and cook HelloFresh because a lot of their recipes use garlic. That'll give you the answer. Also, HelloFresh is the sponsor of this video. HelloFresh delivers fully stocked meal kits right to your front door with recipes created by professional chefs, pre-proportioned with instructions even a dummy like me can follow. It saves time you'd normally spend going to the store, and like I said, they buy direct from farmers, so it's fresher than you get in the store and might not even be available in your local store. And the food is seriously amazing, often with flavor combinations you never had before, so you discover many new foods this way, like Tunisian spiced meatballs or banh mi bowls. It's the kind of thing that my wife and I like to do. We just pour a little wine, put on some music, and cook up the food and eat it and talk about what we liked about it and everything. Usually hang on to some of the recipes and eat it later. It's taken our taste buds to whole new dimensions. So if you want to try it, see what it's all about, just go to HelloFresh.com and use the code JoeScott16 for 16 free meals across 7 boxes and 3 free gifts. 16 meals is a lot of food, by the way, so give it a try. You've got nothing to lose. Just enter JoeScott16 at sign up. You'll get a ton of food, 3 gifts. I would tell you what they are, but they're surprises, so I can't. And you'll feel good about what you eat in a lot of ways. It's good stuff. Give it a try. Links down below. Big thanks to HelloFresh for supporting this video, and a huge shout out to the Answer Files on Patreon who are supporting this channel, forming an awesome community. I can't thank you guys enough. There are some new names to shout out real quick. I've got a lot of them because I'm a little bit behind on these, but here we go. We got Ryan Lynch, Duana Duarte, Dan, Chris Cohn, Dan Carmel, Cole Wagner, Victor Marcius, Brian Lutonen, Mr. Boo, Ron Gilbert, J Dubs, Everett Brunson, Dubman, Sam Callier, Fred Bean, Pedro Aiza, Eric Frank, Dylan Leeser, Ernest Sorensen, Ryan Schluster, Andrew Hale, and James Passmore. I think I just murdered some of those, but thank you guys so much. If you would like to join them, get early access to videos, access to exclusive live streams, and more, just go to patreon.com/answerswithjoe. Please do like and share this video if you liked it, and if this is your first time here, maybe click on this one. It's optimized for something that you might like to see, so Google's been watching you and this is what they think you'll like. Or just check out any of the other little suggestions that might show up down here, thumbnails that have my face on them. Click on them, and if you like them, I invite you to subscribe. I do come back with videos every Monday. All right, gang, that's it for now. You guys go out there, have an eye-opening rest of the week. Please stay safe, and I will see you next Monday. Love you guys. Take care.